My name is Ben Schilaty. I am a gay member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I work full-time at BYU in administration there. So that keeps me pretty busy, and I actually won't be able to linger super long after lunch because I have to go back to work. And the work I do at BYU, I'm basically the principal's office, so if you get in trouble, you have to come talk to me. So no one is happy to see me, but hopefully they're a little happier when they leave. So I want to talk about building bridges for belonging and what that's looked like for me in my life and what it can look like for you in your communities as well. All right, so this is an invitation from a leader of my church, Russell Ballard. He said this. He said, we need to listen to and understand what our LGBT brothers and sisters are feeling and experiencing. Certainly we must do better than we've done in the past so that all members feel they have a spiritual home, where their brothers and sisters love them, and where they have a place to worship and serve the Lord. Now I love this invitation here. Two big words, to listen and understand. Now what listening and understanding is going to look like in each individual life, I don't know. But that's the invitation. That's an invitation that really resonates with me, and I so appreciate his acknowledgement. Certainly, we must do better than we've done in the past. We have to do a better job of listening and understanding. So you guys are going to learn a little bit too much about my personal life right now. So when I was 23 years old, I was an undergraduate student at Brigham Young University. I was recognizing my orientation, I was trying to change it, and things just weren't going great, and I started to spiral down to a pretty bad depression. Now, I've been a good journal keeper for a long time, and I had all these feelings I wanted to write about and explore, but I couldn't put them in my journal because someday my grandkids would read it, and I didn't want them to know that their father and grandfather was gay. So I started a secret journal where I could write down my thoughts and just kind of explore them on my own. Now, there are only 11 entries in the secret journal that I was never going to share with anyone that I'm now going to share with you. So this is from the very first entry. I wrote, since I was a teenager, I have struggled with same-gender attraction, which was the best way for me to describe it at the time. This is the first time I've ever admitted that fact, except in prayer. And that was a big deal for me. Putting those words in writing made it real, and that was a scary thing for me to do. Now, this time I was reading a lot of blogs from other LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and a lot of them ended up leaving the faith community and entering same-sex relationships. And I wrote, referring to this, I will not let that happen to me. I must keep myself worthy at all costs, but it's so hard. This fear that I was going to leave behind my faith. That was very scary to me. And then I wrote, I'm scared that I'll have to admit my same-gender attraction to my family. I know they'd still love me and support me, but I know that it'd be hard for them to deal with. I'd rather go through this alone than hurt my parents. I just want to make them happy. Now, I had no fear about my parents rejecting me or kicking me out of the house. My next-door neighbor growing up, her name is Karen. She's a lesbian woman, and I saw how my parents loved and cared about Karen. I knew if they were that kind to her, they were at least going to be that kind to me. So I had no fear of rejection or being hated or kicked out of the family, but I was worried that my telling them would be a burden on them. And so this was a real fear in my life. Like, if I tell you what's actually happening in my life, I'm going to be a burden on you, and it's better for me to just carry this on my own than to share it with you. So I wrote this in another entry. On Sunday, I was really excited because a girl taught Sunday school that I usually don't find pretty, but she looked super pretty that day. It gave me a lot of hope. I felt like things were improving. Then that night I went to my friend's house and her roommate's boyfriend was there. He's really handsome and I was sickened with myself for thinking so. He was almost too good looking. And I remember that guy, he was very good looking. But this is my reality. If I thought a woman was attractive, like, yay, I was winning. If I thought a guy was attractive, that was bad, and I wanted to change that. And then I wrote, what is the reason for this trial? I know that someday it will end, and I pray that God will hasten the day. So this real experience of, this is a bad thing that's happening to me, I just want it to be over. Now, I was experiencing during this time what I would call passive suicidal ideation. I had no plan to take my life. I was never close to even attempting suicide. But if I had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, I would have been relieved. Because then I could just take this awful secret to the grave and no one would ever have to know about it. And I remember thinking, if I get diagnosed with a terminal illness, then I can die a hero and no one will have to know and I won't have to suffer anymore. And this is something that a lot of people are experiencing. I have a picture of me here from this time in my life, and I have this picture here because this is what it looks like when someone is struggling internally with their orientation. Sometimes it's really hard to tell what's going on. And then just a few more entries. So while I was writing this secret journal that summer, I decided to read the whole Old Testament. So I quote the Old Testament a lot in my secret journal. So I wrote, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Psalm 35. My trials can be very difficult. At times they make me want to give up, but I know that if I'm faithful, that my pain will only endure for a night. And then I quote Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Just this real feeling that God was killing me, but I still had to trust even though God was causing me so much pain. And then I have a picture here of my roommate Craig from that time, and I wrote, I've wanted to tell my roommate Craig about my same-sex attraction, but I don't know if that would be a good idea. Would I find a good support system or lose a friend? This real raw thought that I wrote for no one but myself. And now my secret journal only has 11 entries because I decided to just start writing my real feelings in my actual journal because Craig became the first person that I came out to. And I came out with not much fanfare. I told him that I was more attracted to men than women, and then he wasn't saying very much. And I wasn't sure how he was taking this information that the person that he shared a bedroom with was attracted to guys. And so I finally verbalized this fear that I'd had for months. And I said, Craig, I understand if you don't want to be my roommate anymore. And he said, why wouldn't I want to be your roommate? You're the same person you've always been. And that was the beginning of my healing, when I could tell people what was going on in my life, and they said, this changes nothing. You're the same person you've always been. And Craig and I were roommates for another year until he got married. All right, so I wanted to share just a little bit of academic information with you guys. So I'm going to talk very briefly about Cass's stages of identity development. This is an old model. It was developed in the 70s, but this really shows for me the stages I experienced as someone who was coming out and coming to understand my orientation, and what I've seen a lot of people experience as well. And there are 6 stages. We're not going to go through those. I just want to give you a really broad understanding of what this can look like and what different people need in different stages of their identity formation process. So in the early stages, feelings of same-sex attraction are unacceptable. You've seen this in my secret journal. Someone will honestly identify as heterosexual. Now, people ask me if I was gay because I love the Golden Girls and My Little Ponies, and I'm bad at sports. And I would tell them no, and I wasn't lying. In my mind, I was heterosexual. I just had this trial that was going to go away someday. And people will honestly be looking for reassurances that they aren't LGBTQ, like me thinking that woman who taught Sunday school was attractive. And they'll be seeking information online, and they'll be open to learning, like me looking at all these blogs and reading stories of other LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. I was looking for information online because I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And they'll honestly be pursuing heterosexual relationships. In my 20s, I went on 27 blind dates with women, and I think I went out with 100 unique women. I spent thousands of dollars and many hundreds of hours trying to get married, and I was very unsuccessful. But it was an honest pursuit. So some considerations for you all are these. You are unlikely to be part of this person's journey. When someone is at the very early stages of their coming out process, when they're just trying to figure things out, they're not going to be talking to you about it. That's very unlikely. And so it's a really important thing about, what messages are you sending? What messages are you sending so that people know that you are a safe person for them to talk to? My parents, without knowing it, let me catch them being nice to a gay person. And because I caught them loving a gay person, I knew they were going to love me too. So if we can let people catch us doing good things, saying kind things, being kind and inclusive to LGBTQ people, that is one way that we can support them in this part of their journey that you're going to have no idea that they're even in. So in the later stages, in earlier stages, there are lots of feelings of I'm bad, I'm wrong, I need to change. Lots of shame, self-loathing, self-hatred. In the later stages, those feelings don't change. They just go from being internalized to externalized. So instead of I'm bad, I'm wrong, I need to change, it's you're bad, you're wrong, society needs to change. All the same feelings, they just become externalized. And this is a very normal process. So this is what this looks like. That people will experience increasing anger towards the homophobic elements of society. And then those doubts and self-hatred, like I said, are now pointed outward. And people engage in what the straight community might call dangerous, oppositional, or defiant behavior. Like, this is who I am, you're going to see me, and you're going to accept me. And people will over-identify with the gay subculture and devour books and information online about the culture. So there's this pendulum swing from I'm not LGBTQ, this isn't happening, to this is all that I am. This is everything that I am and the most important thing. It's a very natural process. And eventually the pendulum will land in the middle for most people. And then previous repression becomes liberation. This is when you'll see people marching in pride parades and posting online and sharing all kinds of things. So some considerations for you all is that this might feel like an in-your-face attitude. It might feel like they're really trying to be belligerent and really push against cultural norms. People are just going through a healing process. And I heard someone say once that when you see someone dancing in a Speedo and waving a pride flag, the reaction we should have inside of us is that is a person who is healing. That is a person who is working to heal. And all these feelings of anger toward society, towards themselves, those are very valid feelings, and we can validate those feelings. And we can validate feelings of this is hard, this has been a difficult experience, without agreeing with their positions. And that's something I've really learned, that I can have friends, I can have family members who have very different experiences than I have, and I can still validate that experience and those feelings, even though I'm not experiencing the same thing. So typical phases of coming out is someone coming out to themselves, coming out to close friends, coming out to family, and then coming out more broadly. In this culture, in this conservative community, especially in the Latter-day Saint culture, a bishop or a stake president or a mission president is often the very first person that an LGBTQ Latter-day Saint will come out to. Faith leaders are often the very first person to know. And so it is so important that faith leaders know how to respond so that they can be the person that can be supportive. And it says here, and this is generally true, that people come out to friends before coming out to family. I've talked to a lot of family members who are hurt that they didn't know right away. And there's a very good reason for that. For a lot of people, coming out to friends, they're the people they spend the most time with, the people they connect with. But also, friends are exchangeable. You can find new friends, but you can't replace your family. And so coming out to friends is a good way to test the waters and see how people will respond. So for time's sake, I'm just going to skip the next two slides. I want to tell you some responses I've gotten from church leaders as I've come out. You'll see some good ones and some less than ideal ones. But I've had universally positive experiences talking to church leaders. The first leader I came out to just said, "I don't know what to do." And he was the fourth person I came out to. The fourth person. I came out to my friend Craig and Mitch, and I came out to my friend Natalie, and my bishop was number 4. And when I called to set up an appointment with him, the executive secretary said, "Do you need a half an hour or an hour?" And I said, "I need an hour." And so I came in very nervous and told him that I experienced same-sex attraction. He said, "I don't really know what to do here." And I said, "I don't know either." And he said, "I love you and I trust you." And I said, "Thank you." And that was it. And then we shot the breeze for a few minutes about other things, and then I left. And in a lot of ways, that wasn't a bad experience, because he could have said a lot of negative things, and just saying, "I don't know, but I trust you and I love you and I'm here for you." Those were the messages I needed. And I wish he could have had a little more experience, but that was at least not a negative experience. The next bishop I came out just said, "I'd like to stay out with my daughter." And you know what? I went on the date. And she was lovely. That was a little less helpful than I don't know what to do. But the feeling I got was he doesn't understand what I just told him. So the next bishop that I came out to, I was living in Tucson. I was a much more adult person at the time. I was in my 30s, and I had come out publicly already. And I was asked to give a talk one of my first weeks in this congregation. And I met with the bishop beforehand, and I asked him if I could share that I was gay as part of my talk. And not just to come out, but it was relevant to the message I wanted to share. And he said, "I don't see why that would be a problem." Now, that's not a super positive way to say it, but it was positive enough. And so then, with my bishop's permission, I got up on the stand and I told 150 people that I didn't know that I was gay. And do you know what happened after that experience? There was a receiving line of people after the meeting. At least half a dozen people who I had never met before. And I don't even remember who it was. And they just hugged me, told me they loved me, and said how grateful I was that I was in the congregation. And that was a really beautiful experience that happened because my bishop gave me permission to be open about my orientation. And then I became a Sunday school teacher, and I didn't talk about my orientation all the time, but it was often relevant. And so I was able to share my orientation in lessons, and I had been given permission to do that. And that was the first congregation in my 30s that I really felt like I belonged in, because there was not one part of me that I had to hide. There wasn't one part of me that I couldn't disclose. And not only was I allowed to do that, but by doing that, I was just received with literal embraces and expressions of love. All right, the next bishop said, and this was my bishop in Provo, he said, "What do I need to know and understand so I can serve you better?" There is no better response than that. I had just moved back to Provo, and in Tucson's a pretty liberal city, and I'd been received with open arms there, and I'd been warned by a lot of people that moving back to Provo, that Provo would not be so kind to me. And so I really wondered, like, am I going to be open when I move back to Utah? Like, am I going to go back in the closet? And I wasn't really sure what to do. In my first meeting with my bishop, we were talking about just doing a get-to-know-you meeting. He said, so what brought you back to Utah? And I said, well, I'm starting a master's in social work at BYU. He said, well, why are you doing that? And I said, well, I want to work with LGBTQ clients. And then I paused, and I said, because I'm gay. And then he asked me a few good questions, and then he said, what do I need to know and understand so I can serve you better? What a beautiful response. I don't know everything, so what do I need to know? And then he said, I would love to get to know you better. Can I take you to lunch? And we set up a lunch so that he could take me out. That was 5 years ago. He has taken me to at least 24 lunches since then. We just got lunch again last week. He hasn't even been my bishop for 4 years. But someone who really showed that he wanted to learn, wanted to understand, and that he cared about me. All right, the next response, shortly after this, I moved to a different congregation, and I was called to a pretty high-level calling, at least for me as a single gay man. I was called to the High Council in my stake, and when my stake president called me to this calling, he said this. He said, we're not calling you to be the gay high counselor, but you can talk about it as little or as much as you want. And I was so grateful that he said that. Because, part of me, I don't want to just like make my whole life about being gay. I don't want, like my life is about so much more than just my orientation, but it is an integral part of my life. And by him saying, you can talk about this as little or as much as you want, gave me the freedom to be me and to share my real lived experience as I needed to. And that was such a blessing to me. And now, what happened since then? A couple times there were people who complained about me at church. There are people who were not uncomfortable with me being in that position and me talking openly about what was called my perversions. And do you know what my stake president did? He talked individually to all of those people, and he made sure that he had my back and that they knew that what they were saying wasn't in line with what church leaders were teaching, nor in line with what he was teaching as the leader of our congregations. And then my current bishop. So to work at BYU, we need what's called an ecclesiastical endorsement. What that means is every year, my bishop gets an email from BYU that says, can this person work at BYU? Are they worthy to work at BYU? And then he has to click a button that says yes. And then when he got this email last August, he sent me a text after that just said this: I've never been more honored to sign my name to a document. What a kind thing to say. To say, I am so honored that I get to say that I want you to be there. I want you to work there. So this comes from a website hosted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about ministering or working with members who experience same-sex attraction. I really love the invitation here and the promise because I found it to be true. It says this: some members may feel same-sex attraction or identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. As you seek the guidance of the Holy Ghost and take time to educate yourself about the needs of God's children who experience same-sex attraction or identify as gay, you will develop charity, and your capacity to minister will be magnified. Did you hear that invitation? 2 invitations. Seek the guidance of the Holy Ghost, talk to God, and then take time to educate yourselves. I don't know what that's going to look like in each of your individual spheres. I don't know what it's going to look like to educate yourselves about the needs of God's LGBTQ children. I don't know what it's going to look like to seek inspiration from God in your life. But I know as you do that, these 2 things will happen. You will develop charity. Your capacity to minister will be magnified. What beautiful things. I have a lot of friends who have different experiences than I do, who are also part of the LGBTQ community. And I've been so blessed to be able to read their stories, hear their stories, listen to their stories, and have my heart expanded in ways that I didn't know it could be because I got to step into someone else's shoes. All right, we're going to take a very quick quiz. So what's the most important thing to do after someone discloses feelings of same-sex attraction to you or comes out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? Do you A, make sure they know they shouldn't label themselves? Do you B, share your faith and hope for their future? Do you C, point them to helpful resources? Or do you D, listen and help them feel welcome? What do you think? Yeah, yes, definitely D. You listen and you help them feel welcome. And once again, what is listening and helping people feel welcome going to look like in your lives? I don't know. I don't know the specifics, but that's what you do. You listen and you help them feel welcome. And I've been so blessed by the people in my life who have done that. And then just if you don't quite know how to listen, help someone feel welcome, I've got some questions here that I would recommend asking. And with this invitation, prayerfully consider the following questions to better understand the situation. Seek to provide care and take caution to avoid probing too explicitly. So listen to these questions. Will you please tell me more about your experience? How have these feelings affected your life? How have they affected the lives of your friends and family? These are what we call grand tour questions. And they're called grand tour questions because you're not going in any specific direction. And you will hear all kinds of things and all kinds of different perspectives. And then once someone starts talking, then we can ask follow-up questions. So when I talk to LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, I hear people say things like, my experiences being a gay Latter-day Saint has taught me so much about God, has taught me about Jesus Christ, and has really strengthened me and helped me become a better person. And I'll hear other people say, this has been, like, the church is such a toxic environment and I hate it here. Different situations, but equally valid. And so we shouldn't assume that anyone's having a specific experience in their faith tradition, but we can just ask them broad questions and then ask follow-up questions. This simple question, how can I help you? We don't always need to know what people need, but we can ask them. This next question, would you like us to meet regularly to discuss this? This feels very formal. But when I first came out to people, there was so much I wanted to say and so much I wanted to explore, and it was so awkward for me to always bring it up. And so if I came out to someone, and then a week later they said, thank you, Ben, so much for sharing that with me. Thank you for trusting me. Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? That was such a gift to me. Or if a few days later they contacted me, they said, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your heart with me. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that you didn't get to say? That was always such a gift to me because then I didn't have to be the one bringing it up. And sometimes I didn't want to talk, but at least they opened the door for conversation that I could walk through if I wanted to. And this is important whenever someone shares anything vulnerable with us. We need to check in and say, thank you for sharing that with me. Is there anything else you want to say that you didn't get to say? What a gift that can be. And then labels have different meanings for different people. What do the words gay or lesbian, bisexual, same-sex attraction, and so on mean to you? So not telling people how they should label themselves, but instead asking people, help me understand why you're choosing that label. And this has been really important for me because I've done a complete 180 on how I self-identify. If you had told 25-year-old me, Ben, you're gay, I would have said, I am not gay, I have same-sex attraction. And now if you said to 38-year-old me, Ben, you have same-sex attraction, I would say, no, I am gay. So the complete opposite. And that's been a very purposeful thing for me. So like I said before, when I was in my 20s, I thought that my orientation was this bad, awful, terrible trial. I just had to grit my teeth and clench my fists and live through, and then I would die and be free of it. And those were years of my life when I would have rather been dead and straight than alive and gay. And so for me, the term same-sex attraction reminds me of those times when I felt that way. And so there's a lot of baggage, a lot of heaviness that comes with that term for me. And that's not the same for everybody. And so around the time I turned 30, I was like, you know what? I don't want to use this term anymore. I don't like it. I'm just going to start referring to myself as gay. I tried to change my orientation. I couldn't. I was going to move forward and live my best life. And so for me, the term gay is very life-affirming and thriving. And I just want to share one final thought with you. And I encourage them, so people who experience same-sex attraction, to know God's will, to know God's purpose, and to discern specific and personalized direction on their path. Everyone's path is so unique. My path is Ben Schilaty's path, and I don't know what the right path is for anyone else. And the most important thing that we can do is help people connect with the divine so that they can receive personalized direction on their path. My parents are great examples of this. They are just as faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as anyone could be. I first came out to them when I was 23 years old, just 2 weeks after coming out to that first bishop who said, I don't know what to do. And when I was home visiting for Thanksgiving. And this is what my mom said. She started crying, like happy tears. And then she said, and she told me how much she loved me. And she said, do you think this is a phase? And I said, I hope so. And then my dad said, well, you're probably better off being single because being married is hard. A typical dad response of things could be worse, so be grateful for what you got. And that wasn't terribly helpful. But then over the next 7 years, about once a year, my dad would say, so how's the whole same-sex attraction thing going? And I would say, good. And that was all we ever really talked about because he opened the door, but I didn't want to talk. And then when I was 30, I was really struggling, and I did not want to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints anymore. And I went home for a few weeks on summer vacation for my PhD program, and I just unloaded 7 years of unsaid things onto my parents. I just told them all these hard things. I told them about this guy I'd fallen in love with and how we'd just broken up. I told them about all these terrible things that had happened, all these terrible things people had said to me. And then my mother said this after hearing all these stories that I'd been keeping from her for 7 years. She said, Ben, we're not just on your side, we're with you 100%. If you need to leave the church and marry a man, you and he will always be part of our family. And so what did she do? She told me that no matter what I chose, there was nothing that could take me outside of the circle of our family's love. And that was such a gift to me. She honored my ability to make the choices that were right for me and promising me that there would be no familial consequences for the choices I made. And so what I decided to do, I was like, you know what? I'm done with this church. There is no place for a gay person like me. I do not fit into this doctrine and this culture. But what did I do? I kept praying every day, and I kept studying the scriptures every day. And I found myself just a few days later reading in Matthew 26. And in Matthew 26, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says a very famous prayer there. He says, Father, if thou be willing, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And then what happens? I know something I'd never noticed before. He says that same prayer 2 more times. So 3 times Jesus said, God, I don't want to do this, but I'll do your will, whatever it is. And I thought, there's a lot of things I don't want to do, but I do want to do whatever God's will is for me. And so I knelt down and said a very fervent prayer. I said, Heavenly Father, what cup are you offering me? Like, what do you want me to do? I felt a very annoying and clear prompting that I was supposed to move forward with the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, that is not going to be the case for everyone, but that has been the case for me. And thank goodness my parents knew this principle to help me connect with God, to seek His purpose and personal direction for me in my life. And if faith leaders and families can help people connect with the divine, however they see the divine, and then receive personalized direction on their path, that's where the real beauty is going to come. Now, I have a couple resources here that I've created that are also helpful that I found other people have said are helpful. So I have a copy of my book here called "A Walk in My Shoes: Questions I'm Often Asked as a Gay Latter-day Saint." I wrote this book for straight members of the church, and then my friend Charlie, who wrote this book called "Without the Mask," he wrote the book he wished he had had when he was a gay teen. And we co-host a podcast called Questions from the Closet, which we host in Jody's old basement. I live with Jody's mother, and we record the podcast in her basement, which is fun. And so I forgot to bring a copy of my book, but there's one thing I always share at the end, just this one little paragraph that I wrote at the end of my book. Because my biggest fear in sharing my story is that people will look at me and say, well, Ben's got it figured out. So my LGBTQ loved one, who's also Latter-day Saint, can be just like Ben. And so with that fear in mind, on the second to last page, I wrote this short little paragraph that said, if you read this book and are optimistic about my life, thank you. And then I say, please don't give this book to an LGBTQ loved one. I said, if you have that thought, please stop and consider this for a moment. Instead of giving them my story, can you invite them to tell you theirs? So my invitation to all of you is to take the time to listen to and understand the LGBT people in your lives, because certainly we can do better than we've done in the past.